And now it's time for the real news. Now here's your host, Farron.
Hello and welcome to the Real News. We are at the WDSL studios in beautiful Davie County, and I would like to take an opportunity to inform everyone that if it was not for the hard work and dedication of Mark Singer and Billy Buck, we would not have a radio station here in Davie County. And on behalf of all the citizens of Davie County, I would like to send a special thanks out to them for that. This is your weekly look at the news where you, the listener, can call in and voice your opinions on the current economic and political situations. And we have a lot to talk about today. Our guest today is Charlie Giles. Charlie was a first responder on 9/11/2001. He has become very ill from his heroic actions on that day, as has thousands. He will join us after the first break to tell us of the plight of these first responders and how the government has done little to nothing to aid these real patriots. But today, let's begin with the bailout passed yesterday, and may I say, full of pork also, for racetracks, rum producers, arrow makers. Even in this so-called crisis, our politicians couldn't resist selling out the taxpayers even more. I would like to start by pointing out the obvious fact that the very ones that have purposely ran our economic ship aground are the very ones coming to the government saying, give us $700 billion of the people's money, you hopelessly bankrupt government, and we, the wizards of Wall Street, will fix it. Now they have the money, let's see what they can do. This is as ridiculous as, say, a person hires a builder to build a house, and after completed, the homeowner falls through the floor from the second story all the way into the basement and then hires the same builder to fix it again. But I want to go a step further. Bush plainly stated just mere weeks ago that our economy, and I quote, was basically sound, and also did Barney Franks. So, are we to believe that while Bush was combing the globe trying to incite as many conflicts as humanly possible before leaving office, that he and his cabinet and all of his super-educated, high-paid geniuses were caught unaware? They woke one day to be told of this sudden event because they were too dim-witted to see for themselves our economy was in serious trouble. Are we to believe what is being reported? Our leaders did not see this coming, though the coming collapse had been widely prophesied by so many. David Walker, here on this show, Ron Paul, Pastor Baldwin, again here on this broadcast, a host of well-respected economists, and even some of our listeners, Bill Anderson, Dave, Harb, Al, Brian, and myself. So please, Mr. Bush, please, Congress, please, Senate, please don't insult the public's intelligence. You were well aware of what was inevitable to happen. But in a marvelous display of how leaderless we have become, absolutely nothing was done. What needs to be done, you ask? Dissolve the corrupt Federal Reserve and return to a currency backed by silver and gold. Elect someone that actually represents we the people. Now I know that really is a tough one to do. Until this is done, the American people will continue to see our economy being played like a yo-yo, and you, the taxpayer, foots the bill whenever these greedy criminals feel it's time to fleece us, the peasants, once again. So this will be one of our questions today for you listeners. After our guest, when we go to the phones, let's hear what the public has to say about the bailout. Who is to blame? How are you doing economically today? And how about the fact both presidential candidates embraced the bailout? And what can we do locally to affect some real change to better our situation? And does anyone think this will fix the economic problems in our country? But first, several people have asked us why we oppose the Federal Reserve and how the Federal Reserve works. So in light of the importance of this week's events, we have a clip that explains the Federal Reserve banking system. So I'm going to turn to Brian and we're going to play that clip for you.
This is a clip from the movie Zeitgeist. It explains in simple terms so everyone can understand exactly what is a central bank.
Specific powers are inherent in central banking practice. The control of interest rates and the control of the money supply, or inflation. The central bank does not simply supply a government's economy with money, it loans it to them at interest. Then, through the use of increasing and decreasing the supply of money, the central bank regulates the value of the currency being issued. It is critical to understand that the entire structure of this system can only produce one thing in the long run: debt. It doesn't take a lot of ingenuity to figure this scam out. For every single dollar produced by the central bank is loaned at interest. That means every single dollar produced is actually the dollar plus a certain percent of debt based on that dollar. And since the central bank has the monopoly over the production of the currency for the entire country, and they loan each dollar out with immediate debt attached to it, where does the money to pay for the debt come from? It can only come from the central bank again, which means the central bank has to perpetually increase its money supply to temporarily cover the outstanding debt created, which in turn, since that new money is loaned out at interest as well, creates even more debt. The end result of this system without fail is slavery, for it is impossible for the government and thus the public to ever come out of the self-generating debt. The founding fathers of this country were well aware of this.
Hope you're listening carefully, everyone. Keep listening, everyone, carefully.
By the early 20th century, the U.S. had already implemented and removed a few central banking systems, which were swindled into place by ruthless banking interests. At this time, the dominant families in the banking and business world were the Rockefellers, the Morgans, the Warburgs, the Rothschilds. And in the early 1900s, they sought to push, once again, legislation to create another central bank. However, they knew the government and public were very weary of such an institution, so they needed to create an incident to affect public opinion. So, J.P. Morgan, publicly considered a financial luminary at the time, exploited his mass influence by publishing rumors that a prominent bank in New York was insolvent or bankrupt. Morgan knew this would cause mass hysteria, which would affect other banks as well. And it did. The public, in fear of losing their deposits, immediately began mass withdrawals. Consequently, the banks were forced to call in their loans, causing the recipients to sell their property, and thus a spiral of bankruptcies, repossessions, and turmoil emerged. Putting the pieces together a few years later, Frederick Allen of Life magazine wrote, "The Morgan interests took advantage to precipitate the panic, guiding it shrewdly as it progressed." Unaware of the fraud, the Panic of 1907 led to a congressional investigation headed by Senator Nelson Aldrich, who had intimate ties to the banking cartels and later became part of the Rockefeller family through marriage. The commission, led by Aldrich, recommended a central bank should be implemented, so Panic like 1907 could never happen again. This was the spark the international bankers needed to initiate their plan. In 1910, a secret meeting was held at a J.P. Morgan estate on Jekyll Island off the coast of Georgia. It was there that the central banking bill called the Federal Reserve Act was written. This legislation was written by bankers, not lawmakers. This meeting was so secretive, so concealed from government and public knowledge, that the 10 or so figures who attended were told they could only use their first names in addressing each other. After this bill was constructed, it was then handed over to their political frontman, Senator Nelson Aldrich, to push through Congress. And in 1913, with heavy political sponsorship by the bankers, Woodrow Wilson became president, having already agreed to sign the Federal Reserve Act in exchange for campaign support. And 2 days before Christmas, when most of Congress was at home with their families, the Federal Reserve Act was voted in, and Wilson in turn made it law. Years later, Woodrow Wilson wrote, in regret,
I am a most unhappy man. I have unwittingly ruined my country. A great industrial nation is controlled by its system of credit. Our system is concentrated. The growth of the nation, therefore, and all of our activities are in the hands of a few men. No longer a government of free opinion, no longer a government by the conviction and the vote of the majority, but a government by the opinion and duress of a small group of dominant men. Woodrow Wilson. We're going to go to a break.